My name is Nick Jain. I'm an observability advocate and a tech writer with New Relic. Um, Today, I'm going to talk about a really hot technology called Istio. And I'm going to give you some foundation knowledge on what a service mesh is and why is there a need for a solution like service mesh in the market. Lastly, I'm going to walk you through the architecture of a really popular service mesh called Istio. So let's dive straight into it. Now, firstly, before we go into the architecture and the description of what Istio is, I want to talk about how we used to build applications back in the days and the way the applications were architected. So we had something called as a three-tier architecture, which is to a degree even applicable today. Now you have your client talking to an application server, and you might have two instances of those application server. The application server is a big block of logic with a variety of different user transactions implemented in terms of your most popular programming languages. And then those applications talk to a database service in terms of storing information, in terms of fetching information, updating information, or deleting information. Now, fast forward in today's time. Now, this story, a lot of you already know, but what you might not know is companies like Amazon and Netflix use a spaghetti type of network of microservices. Microservices is nothing but a smaller building block of application services that were decomposed from the previous monolith of an application server. And these services create a really intricate network of communications, which is service-to-service communication, that can become really challenging in terms of routing, in terms of observing for performance purposes, in terms of platform support, traffic management, and even in terms of integration. So I think we all know to a degree that such implementations are done atop container orchestration systems like Kubernetes, Mesos, and even Docker Swarm. Now, the need for having an Istio or a service mesh type of capability is to allow the extraction of the routing, of the security aspect of the calls from one microservice to another microservice, and even observing and monitoring these microservices in an easier fashion. So what service mesh basically is, it is a simple network of microservices that controls, secures, manages, and observes the network communication between microservices in a easy to understand way. So what we're going to do now is firstly start by building a high-level goal. The goal for Istio, or even Linkerd, which is another open source service mesh project, is to simplify the network communications management of a microservices ecosystem. And you only need a service of this fashion in the circumstances where you're using hundreds or even thousands of microservices. You don't really need Istio or service mesh for smaller services, and you will shortly see why that's the case. So in a broad brush fashion, a service mesh has two major components or sections of components. The first one is the control plane, which manages a service mesh. And the second one is the data plane, which basically collects the telemetry and all the important attributes that you kind of package together to understand how the service is performing and what sort of routing is needed for that service to be able to communicate with a service B. So it essentially eases out calls between the source microservice and the destination microservice. And so let's look at the data plane services to begin with. So this is your Kubernetes worker node with a service A, and then there is another Kubernetes service node or worker node with a service B. Now these two services are supposed to talk to each other to be able to execute a certain transaction on behalf of the end user. Now the first sub-service I want to introduce from the Istio collection of services, especially from the data plane side of things, is something we refer to as Envoy. And this was founded at Lyft. So Envoy basically is a sidecar container. So imagine a pod with two containers. One is your application container, which executes the transaction. And the second one is your sidecar container, which is sort of like an intelligent proxy that controls all the network communications between the microservice along with another service from the control plane of a service mesh. And this I refer to as the mixer. So Envoy basically reports all the collected attributes. It could be name of the service. It could be time taken by a service to complete a certain request. It could be the next service in chain from service A to service B. So all those type of attribute collections are posted by the Envoy side container into your control plane service B. Now that's your first type of service from Istio's control plane section. So the idea behind the mixer engine is to kind of behave like an attribute processing machine. And right next to the mixer engine, you have your pilot subservice of a service mesh. Pilot subservice executes functions like service discovery, traffic management, intelligent routing, and even supporting A/B testing, canary deployments, and providing resiliency to your network of microservices. Next up, you have Citadel, which is responsible for authentication and identification management or identity management and certificates used for securing the communications between services. So just to kind of recap what we have just covered, Istio is basically made up of two types of services. One is your data plane services, which is your Envoy service, which sits as a sidecar container on a microservices pod and reports everything into a mixer engine, which processes those attributes collected by Envoy and reports it into a visualizer for observability purposes or for monitoring purposes. So one option is to use technologies like New Relic by using an Istio adapter, and you can quickly export all of the collected attributes into New Relic for dashboarding purposes. Second, we have Pilot. Pilot is your exactly like how it sounds. It's the control plane mother service, and it basically helps with service discovery, traffic management, intelligent routing, A/B testing, canary deployments, and even providing resiliency between the network communications of your microservices. And last one is Citadel, which essentially helps you with securing the communication between various microservices. I hope this video was useful for you. Bye for now.